Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're gonna make a sort of update slash maintenance. I have some orchids that I really need to attend to, and if there's one thing that I'm not particularly good at, is making sure that the orchids don't have dried leaves and stuff of the sorts. If it's not crucial, I usually don't do it. I do something else, but sometimes some orchids really do need my attention. Take you guys along with me, see what I need to do, and also make an update on all of the orchids that I'm gonna work on. I know some of you wanted to see some of these orchids. So that said, let's start. I just wanted to film a little bit this Aeranthus because, oh, she's wild, isn't she? Not sure about that fragrance yet, but I'll see how it develops. Okay, so first orchid we're gonna take a look at today. This is not cosmetic or just cosmetic. This orchid seriously needs help. I actually received this orchid quite recently. I don't think you know it. This is the Potinara Spanish Eyes Water. So what you see here is quite a serious issue. When I received this orchid, I cannot really remember if it already had a little bit of a sunburn on its leaf or if the sun damage happened a day or two after I received it. In the position where I keep it, she only receives sun early in the morning, but since I don't remember, I'll admit that there is a chance this orchid got sunburned in my care. If not, then she came with the damage. Bottom line is the sunburn actually developed into something worse. So, okay, this leaf is already gone. You can see this is where the sunburn happened, and everything else, it's just additional damage or further infection. Now, this happened quite recently. I had that burn there for quite a while, and usually when I have sunburn on my leaves, I let them be because the leaf around it is perfectly capable to photosynthesize, is functional. But once in a blue moon, it can happen that you can have a secondary infection or something developing around that sunburn, which you need to attend to. So let me get you in closer to take a look at the pseudobulb. There we go. The worst case scenario is that that infection can spread to the pseudobulb. And this is what happened here. You can see I have a very dark colored pseudobulb here at the top, and if I leave this unattended, the infection will just go downwards. So what I need to do is actually cut the pseudobulb, but it will be interesting to show you where I'm going to cut it. So first things first, I need to sterilize my cutting tools. Be right back. Alrighty, so we all know that Camellia orchids don't really produce keikis. They don't have, let's say, segments on their pseudobulbs, but the thing is, they actually do. Most of them, if not all of them. If you look close to the base, further up, you will see a ring. That is a segment. I'm gonna call it like that because I'm not entirely sure about its scientific name. Sometimes Cattleyas can even produce growths from this side. It's rarer, but it can happen if the available eyes on the bottom are not available anymore. Anyway, the thing is, being that it's a segment, it marks the ending of something. And usually that something is the very fleshy, let's say, pseudobulb part. So what I like to do is cut a pseudobulb right above this ring. Even though my infection stops here, if I cut it here, I will be exposing quite a big part of the very sensitive and very soft tissue. At the ring here, the tissue is not so soft, not so, let's say, wet. So my preferred method is to remove pseudobulbs right above this segment. And that's what I will do right now. And you will see that right here, I don't have such a tender and such an exposed part of the orchid. So a clean cut. And let me just give you a close-up. There we have it. Right here, the pseudobulb is actually much narrower than right here. You can see that this orchid does have a sort of oval shape. It's not a perfectly round pseudobulb, but here at this joint, we are dealing with a much smaller exposed area. The next thing that I like to do is spray hydrogen peroxide directly on the pseudobulb, the cut pseudobulb. And as a final step, I will be applying cinnamon. This is your typical supermarket ground cinnamon, and this will pretty much seal this cut. And I will also try to maintain this area dry. So when I water this orchid, I will make sure that I will not put water right here. I said this in a different video, but there were a few people asking me why I use cinnamon because it repels water. If you insist, it's not gonna repel water anymore. It's actually getting wet. Cinnamon is grounded bark. So if you think of the bark that we're using with orchids, yeah, it sometimes repels water, but if you insist, it gets wet. And moreover, it actually absorbs water. Alrighty, next up, an orchid that I know some of you wanted to see. This is the Grammatophyllum scriptum. He's a big boy, look how much he grew. And well, this orchid has some cosmetic damage. At this point, this damage has been here for a lot of time. It's not advancing. And as I was saying, I'm not really great with removing unsightly damage, which doesn't really pose any threat. But since we're looking at this orchid, let's do a little bit of maintenance. The new growth looks spectacular. And I do believe it will be so large in comparison to the others. This orchid is known for being a little monster. It's a very big orchid. The roots inside are doing much better in this mixture than in semi-hydro. And soon enough, I'm hoping to get those roots which grow upwards, creating that basket type of appearance. I think these orchids are also called trash basket or something like that. What they do in nature is they create tiny little roots which are different from the potted ones, which stick up and they actually catch debris. And that's how this orchid gets its fertilizer. Pretty neat, huh? Well, mine didn't start to do that just yet. I'm hoping to get some of those pretty soon. But until then, let's make sure that she looks good. So you can see here that the damage I'm talking about is only at the leaf tip, which is a shame. This orchid is variegated, really lovely, but this damage really does not look all that great. So what I'm gonna do is cut the affected part, and I'm gonna cut it at an angle to make things appear a little bit more natural. Can you imagine if I cut it like this? You would see the cut from a mile away, but if I cut it like so, and I wish I had a longer scissors, but I don't. So if I cut it like this, you can see it's pretty natural, it blends in. If you get closer, you can notice that the leaf has been cut, but if you don't know what you're looking at, you might think it's natural. Well, as natural as it can get. P.S. Always sterilize your tools in between orchids because you can pass disease if you don't sterilize it. And I think we're looking a lot better. Certainly you don't see that browning anymore on the orchid, you only see the greenery. And maybe I should put this away. So the Grammatophyllum is currently residing outside. This is a hot growing orchid. Thus you might see a few ants here and there, and my ants have never done anything bad, so don't worry about them. Please try to ignore them. And with proper conditions and proper care, I'm hoping that this growth is big enough to bloom. These orchids don't necessarily need to get super big to be able to bloom, and the flower spikes are absolutely impressive. So I would be so happy to see this orchid spiking, and I do believe we have great chances of that happening this year, and of course I'll keep you guys up to date. But there we go, this is the Grammatophyllum doing quite nicely. Next up, here we have a Miltoniopsis. This is the Miltoniopsis red tide. Now, for those of you who know Miltoniopsis hybrids, you know that I can't be right. This cannot be the red tide, but it kind of is. I purchased this orchid a little while back, a few months ago. I was very diligent with placing tags. This is the red tide. I wrote it here. I never moved it from the place I kept it in. Moreover, I repotted it a few weeks ago, so pretty recently, and the flowers were just dropping then. It was in bloom for quite a long time, so I know 100% that this orchid had red purple flowers and that it was the red tide hybrid. Look what happened. Initially, this orchid had a flower spike here. You can see the remains. And this is another direction of growth in the back here with the growth that just matured. You can see it's a little crinkly due to the environment change and the repotting and all of that. The flower spike was actually trapped in between the leaves, and I saw it in time to save it, but I couldn't make it straight, so that's why it's a little bendy here. And you can imagine my surprise when I saw the blooms that had white and all of these colors which red tides don't have. So there are two possibilities here. One, it is a color changer. It's the most dramatic color changing orchid that I've ever seen, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll link it down below to a much more elaborated discussion with examples and all of that. No need to go into much detail now because we're just gonna waste time. I already talked about it, but there is a chance it's a color changer, although I do believe the second possibility is much more plausible. There are actually two separate plants in this pot, and moreover, two separate varieties. Now, since I repotted it recently, and you know how I repot orchids, I'm pretty thorough in removing all of the old medium, rinsing the root system, I would have noticed if the rhizome was interrupted anywhere, but I didn't notice anything. As far as I'm concerned, this is one orchid. Now, it's not something new that nurseries put multiple orchids in one pot, particularly if they're grown from seed. When you remove seedlings from the flask, you don't always remove them one by one. You just put a little clump in a pot, and the future owner will observe in time that he actually has multiple orchids. That's how it happens. But usually it doesn't happen that in one pot we have multiple varieties. But hey, everything is possible. So I think the most plausible thing is that these are two orchids here, although I could swear the rhizome was not interrupted. But you know what? We're just gonna wait and see how this little growth blooms. Will it be the red tide? Will it be this hybrid? I don't know. If it is indeed the red tide, this section, then I'm gonna go back and separate the orchid. I don't wanna have two different varieties in one pot. It's not the moment to repot now, so I'm not gonna do anything about it now or check to see if there are two orchids. But yeah, imagine the surprise I had when this orchid bloomed. So about the tidying up part, you can see I have some yellowing leaves here. Usually when this happens, I just let them be. It is normal for orchids in time to lose all their leaves. And when they do so, they do have a method of actually separating the leaf properly. Do you see that I have a joint here? I'm not sure if this leaf will come apart, but typically when the leaf is dry enough, it just comes apart from here really easy. This one was not completely dry, so that's why I had to pull a little bit on it. But do you see how straight it's separated? Yeah, pretty much all orchids have this, let's say, segment or separation line somewhere. So what I prefer to do is just let them dry. They don't hurt anything, they're not diseased or anything, and then just remove them when they're dry. So in this case, yeah, it doesn't look very good. This is another older leaf. But if I were to cut them again, I would make that open door for pathogens, and I'd rather not do that. Once the leaf is dry, it cannot be infected with anything. So that's what I prefer to do, just let them dry. This one does not look pretty, but hey, it's healthier to just let it be and remove it when it's dry. Now, there are orchids or instances in which it's really not a good idea to perform cosmetic maintenance. For example, the Maxillaria tenuifolia. We can see that even though this is a perfectly healthy orchid, we have some dried bits here and there. In this case, it really isn't a good idea to start removing these sheaths. Can you see the pattern of growth of this orchid? Each pseudobulb is created pretty much on top of the previous pseudobulb. Where are the roots? Every pseudobulb should be full of roots at the base, right? Well, the roots are there, but they're concealed. They actually grow in these sheaths downwards, and they grow sometimes long enough to reach the medium. Removing the sheaths meaning exposing the roots, which can be detrimental for this orchid. Not to mention, through removing these sheaths, you can actually damage the root system if you're not careful. So in this instance, it is a much better idea to let these sheaths be. In time, some of them will just fall naturally because they cannot last on the orchid forever. But it's not a good idea for you to start removing them from everywhere. The sheaths that can drop will drop, while the sheaths which are supposed to be covered will remain covered for a very long time. What you can do is actually remove the flowers that are spent. But as you can see, I'm not a fan of doing that either because, well, I just consider it a waste of time. At some point, this flower will completely dry, it will drop on its own, and it will drop from here, not here. It will pretty much be like it never was. So why do I need to waste time now removing all of these just to make the orchid look better for the next few days when this flower will drop on its own? That's how I think about things. Of course, there's nothing wrong with removing it to make the orchid look pretty, but when you have a lot of orchids and a lot of things to do, it can be a little bit of a waste of time. There's nothing wrong if you let it be on the orchid, it will just drop naturally, but there's nothing wrong if you want to remove it yourself. It's all up to you and your availability. If you like to work on your orchid and maintain them and make sure they're pretty, then go ahead and do that. Why not? It's your joy. In some cases, it is actually beneficial to remove dried material. Sometimes you will have an orchid which is putting out new growth, but the dried remains of the leaf around it are very, very tough, depending on the orchid. In some cases, if this leaf is very thick, the new growth will have issues in putting out roots and it will start to produce them from the top. Anyway, it's a good idea if you can to actually remove these leaves or remains. So what you can do is hold the orchid in place if you just repotted it and just pull upwards. And there you have it. So make sure that the orchid is rooted. If you just repotted the orchid like I did, make sure that you hold the orchid down. But there you have it. Many times you don't necessarily need to do that, but sometimes some orchids will have such rigid dried leaves that new growths will have issues with them. So it depends on the orchid. In my case, it wasn't necessary, but I did want to show you or demonstrate how to do it. And with most orchids, after the blooms fall, the flower spike will start to dry, so you can absolutely remove it. But in the case of Phalaenopsis, you can actually have a secondary branch or secondary spike. Now, different growers have different techniques, so I'm going to tell you my technique. First of all, if the flower spike is completely dry, it will never ever rebloom from anywhere. It will not create a secondary branch or anything. If it's completely dry, it is safe to cut it, and you can rest assured nothing else would have grown on it. So no worries about that. About the green spikes, many growers, especially beginner growers, tend to leave the flower spike be or cut it between where the flowers used to be and a node in the hopes that they will get a secondary branch or secondary spike. I am not into that. I'm not a fan of that. What I like to do is let the orchid have a pretty clean growing season without any distractions, quotation marks, because flower spikes, especially if they start to develop a secondary branch, they consume energy. They don't just sit there without doing anything. As long as something is alive and green on a plant, it consumes energy. It's not there doing nothing and being supported by nothing. So my preferred way of doing things is to completely remove the flower spikes and completely remove the possibility of branches, of continuous flowering and so on. At some point you reach a point where you're okay with the amount of months you had your Phalaenopsis in bloom, and all you want is to have a really, really powerful single spike or double spike in the season to come. If I let this orchid start to branch out now, it's going to take from the energy that this orchid will put into a new flowering in the autumn or winter. And I don't want to do that. I want to have a good single show, not drag it on a year or two, whatever. So my preferred method is to completely cut these flower spikes from as low as possible, completely eliminating the chance of the flower spikes branching or continuing to flower. And I know that's something that sounds a little weird for many of you, particularly if you don't have a lot of orchids or if you just purchased your Phalaenopsis, you're just new to the hobby, you want more flowers all the time, right? At some point, after a number of years and a number of orchids, it starts to lose its appeal. What I'm more interested in is having a great show in the flowering season, not having some flowers, no matter the quality of the flowers, pretty much all the time. It's a personal preference, and if you want to learn more about cutting flower spikes, I'll share with you down below another video if you want to go a lot more into detail than what I just said today. So that's about it for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I have a pretty busy week because I did make my aquarium already. It's not finished. You know how it is, you cannot find everything in stock at once, so I got the basics. But yeah, hopefully pretty soon we're gonna have a video on the other channel, which I didn't think of a name yet, but we'll see how I change it. When I will post a video about how I made my aquarium and, you know, all the things, all the nice things, I will let you guys know, of course. I'm not gonna link down below to my other YouTube channel because the link might change. But yeah, stay tuned on this channel as well. I will let you know when I finish my aquarium and when I start posting there as well. So with that said, you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you'd like to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below in the description. We have limited edition Nelly Eiler merch. It's available until the 21st of July, and afterwards it will be gone forever. So if you like it, then you have links in the description. So with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!